So, I had a look for the first time at something called YouTube Studio, which is where there's a sort of expanded version of YouTube's analytics feature, and what I found there was really, really interesting. So apparently, the majority of you are repeat viewers or subscribed, and you're from the following demographics. So the reasonable majority of you are female, the majority of you are 25 to 34, followed by the surrounding demographics, and there's quite a few old people watching my video as well, so hello. The vast majority of you are from the US of A, followed in, reasonable second by the United Kingdom, followed third by India, and then a few people from Russia and Australia. And I think that's a really interesting thing. Now, what struck me while I was looking at these analytics was that I have covered a lot on British systems, because of course. I've covered a reasonable amount of American systems, because they're pretty important. What I haven't covered are the systems of my third largest apparent demographic, that being Indians. Now, I've only talked about one Indian system out of everything I've talked about, out of 70 odd videos. And the thing I've talked about is BrahMos, which is incredible technology. But I think I'm going to be doing a few entries on Indian military stuff beyond BrahMos, beyond the Mahabharata. So, India is not something to be ignored. A lot of people dismiss it militarily, but it's becoming more and more capable. It has a ridiculously proud military history. Just incredible. Like, unbelievable. So I've become quite interested in really what India's been doing over the past few years, and I'm of the belief that within my lifetime, certainly, we will see India come to the forefront of military potency. It's shown remarkable growth over the past few years, and it has become just, ever more independent from nations like Russia for projects. That influence is still there, but it's developing far more stuff on its own, and it's becoming excellent at it. It's producing really, really great systems that are independent to itself, and it has sort of a unique take on that. Certain European systems show a degree of homogeneity, and that's generally true of Western systems in general, but Indian systems are somewhat unique. So today I'm going to talk about another cruise missile, not just BrahMos. This cruise missile has been created with more independence than BrahMos. Now today I'm talking about Nirbhay. Nirbhay, as I said, is an Indian cruise missile. It's only been developed really quite recently. Famously, in a test flight in 2013, it veered off course and the test had to be aborted. And that's not something often seen. I remember in 2016 I was reading an article that was claiming how India's defense program was failing, how Nirbhay was a complete failure. Yet in the time since, it's advanced dramatically. And it's actually, probably going to be pretty powerful, particularly in the next few years as it's upgraded and made more compatible with better systems. So, Nirbhay in Hindi means fearless, dauntless, and it seems pretty potent as a system. It has a length of 6 meters and a width of 0.5, a wingspan of 2.7 meters, and a payload of 200 to 300 kilograms. Potentially, speculatively, even 450 kilograms. And that's only going to change as it becomes more modular. It can be equipped with either a nuclear warhead or a more conventional fragmentation warhead. But obviously that's going to increase as time goes on. It uses a turbofan engine. I believe it also, that's basically a joint project. It uses NPO's Saturn, which is an engine by, I think, NPO Mashinastроения, which is Russian. And it uses that to fly at subsonic speeds, around Mach 0.7 to 0.9, in order to maintain a lower profile. So clearly, all the Russian influence isn't gone, but India is becoming more independent. Nirbhay has a range of 1,500 kilometers, and while that seems pretty short for, such a modern, non-ramjet cruise missile, we see Tomahawk going farther, and that was developed in the 80s. Even the more recent development is less old than Nirbhay. Note that the DRDO, which is the Indian sort of Ministry of Defense, says that there is an air-launched variant being developed, a capability which Tomahawk doesn't have. And this is important because it hugely extends its range if it becomes compatible. Now, it's also true that Nirbhay, unlike Tomahawk, can't be naval-launched. Now, I'm thinking, and this is just speculation, if only there were a munition, a really, really powerful, penetrative cruise missile, developed, I don't know, somewhere in Europe, with sledgehammering capability that could be launched from ships and aircraft. Oh well, guess we'll never see that. Anyway, Nirbhay might have its range extended by its ability to be complemented by fixed-wing systems. If you can have certain planes carrying it further, then that makes it even more powerful. And what makes it even more powerful than that is that if you're considering there's an upgrade to the, basically, plane, the aircraft infrastructure of India through the creation of an independent aircraft carrier, not one that's sort of second-hand, then it's going to hugely increase its air power around the world, as well as naval power through air power. So perhaps it's sort of a double improvement in making Nirbhay air capable. Now, for the moment, it uses a ground-launched variant, and the way that gets up is basically it uses solid fuel propellant to position itself, and then cruise begins. In regard to its guidance system, I think this is quite interesting because it's quite advanced, certainly more, I guess, technical than what one might see in some other older cruise missiles. It uses a laser gyroscope, as well as inertial navigation, which is to be expected of a sort of modern cruise missile, and MEMS gyroscope, basically. And actually, this is probably a good time to explain what that is. An MEMS gyroscope, actually, this is an interesting fact. It has a really important role to play. For any GCSE geographers out there, and I was certainly one, you'll know about the Coriolis force. Now, for non-GCSE geographers, what are you doing? And second, it's basically a force that is created as the Earth rotates. And this creates issues when objects are traveling long distances. It affects air currents, basically. And what this generally does is it tends to skew certain munitions to go in the northern hemisphere, sort of veer to the right due to the force and air currents moving in that direction, and to the left in the southern hemisphere. Now, if you don't want your missile going askew, then you need an MEMS gyroscope, or at least some sort of equivalent. I think that's right anyway. MEMS, what it does is it measures the effect of the Coriolis force based upon Earth's rotation, and then it does its best to balance it out. So there you go. I bet that's something you didn't know about missiles. They have to factor in the Coriolis force in order to avoid traveling in a weird, skewed, awkward curve and missing their target. Anyway, Nirbhay also uses GPS, which you'd expect from pretty much any missile, certainly a cruise missile, as well as its naval or naval sea. And what that is it's basically India's military system for positioning based upon satellites, and it can direct over regional areas. So India will have a certain satellite above, and that can direct and plan the route of Nirbhay, wherever it's going, wherever it's cruising to, and monitor it within that time. And that's actually quite a powerful system. In the terminal phase, when the cruise is done, when mid-phase is done, for the terminal phase it uses active radar homing, image match, like the Tomahawk, as well as electro-optical matching. And this is really what you'd expect for the modern cruise missile, although I think there were a few people who were a bit disappointed that the image matching is, I guess, particularly in infrared. But for all those people who aren't too impressed with it being infrared, I don't think that has too much of an effect. Tomahawk, certainly, it has dual mode capability, but Nirbhay can, do really well. It can pick out specific targets from multiple identical surrounding targets, so that's an important thing. And something Indians can, and generally do, make a claim about their new missile is that it has excellent loitering capability. So, being a modern missile, that's likely. It can loiter without engaging. What that means, it can basically fly around, circumnavigate the target until it's time to strike. It can disengage, re-engage with a target after performing evasive maneuvers. And that's pretty impressive. That's pretty important, particularly for these longer range subsonic cruise missiles, which, need to be launched in advance. And it means one can have ammunition hovering around a certain point. It means that one can have closer missile power without actively having to use it. One can have stuff ready in the most dire of circumstances. Also, typically, as cruise missiles have done since, the 70s, Nirbhay has sea skimming capability, and what that means is it can travel as low as possible, as low as 50 meters above a surface. Now that's not especially low, but that's still low enough to be below radar. It can also travel as high into the sky as 4 kilometers as a maximum altitude. Now, Nirbhay, I think, is an important thing. It's fearless, it's dauntless, but it's a really important step for the Indian defense generally, the defense complex. It gives India the fastest cruise missile in the world for shorter range threats, that being BrahMos, which is only going to get faster when BrahMos 2 is, I guess, adapted, which is rather powerful on its own, as well as Nirbhay for longer range threats, and that will only get extended as Nirbhay is upgraded, updated, and becomes compatible with aircraft, and India gets its aircraft carrier. Now imagine something that could soon be the future. India pushing forward in defense, using BrahMos going Mach 8, Nirbhay extending its range, and being potentially utilized by the AMCA plane, India's 6th generation advanced medium combat aircraft. And that's all being used on an aircraft carrier that is India's own. It's not second-hand. They'll have a larger fleet of submarines, better planes, better missiles, more naval vessels, upgraded helicopters, its own domestically built aircraft carriers. So here's what I'd say more generally. Nirbhay is a pretty great missile, and it's an excellent sign of stepping forward, as well as BrahMos, for India, particularly in developing less influence from Russian forces. So as much as the UK, the US, Russia, France, Germany, Japan are seen as the world's defense frontrunners, and currently they are, don't put India down, because realistically, I'm of the opinion that it's on its way up. And I'll leave it there.